Let's stay with that story. I'm joined now by Women and Men Against Child Abuse Advocacy Manager Luke Landrek. Luke, good to have you with us tonight again. Are we now creating another situation where we're traumatizing a child? Yes, she might have been in conflict with the law in how we are handling this particular matter.
The concern that I have around this case is the fact that the offence that occurred, the assault that she's now being charged with, was obviously exacerbated by the fact that nothing was done and then the victim took her own life. So there seems to be now an attempt to almost retrofit the Child Justice Act processes for the assault, because now suddenly it is seen as something that is, carries a lot more weight and gravity because of the death of the other child. So the processes that are being followed are definitely the ones prescribed by law, because children over 14 have automatic criminal capacity, but it seems unclear in my mind what, in terms of the spokespeople talking about the difference between the Child Justice Court, which is a criminal court, and the Children's Court, which is a child in need of care. So I'm not quite sure under what they are actually holding her.
Yeah. So, in your view, where is this particular matter supposed to sit?
The matter in terms of the criminal capacity, so when a child is over 14, they have automatic criminal capacity, and that then appears in the juvenile criminal court. So the child is charged with a crime, but they're entitled to access to a probation officer for assessment. They're entitled to the preliminary inquiry. So their rights as juvenile detainees are protected, and obviously they will be detained separately from any adult. But the difficulty with this case is the fact that there is also something to be said about the fact that this process should have occurred prior to the other young lady taking her life, because it's for the same assault. But now, because of the huge kind of, the tragedy of the two children now, this case has been elevated, and with it being elevated, it seems to fall between the different structures. It can still go to the Children's Court, but that's a process called a conversion, or it can be diverted, in other words, sending her to another program, but that's based on besides is the schedule of the crime, so in other words, the severity of the crime.
What about what those rights say about these delays that are going on now? Is there a consideration of the age of the child, the fact that the minor is being separated from the parents at this particular point? Are there such considerations?
Absolutely. So the detention of a child is an absolutely last resort. So even the removal of a child from their family is the absolutely last resort, because what we need to consider is the fact that, children belong in families and they need to be cared for within those family structures. Now, generally, as the defense attorney was saying in your clip, is that generally you would have her released to her parents, because, she's not a flight risk in terms of bail. Because bail is a very specific thing in its own right, because someone is innocent until proven guilty. And what bail is there to do is to ensure that they will come back to court to appear. Now, I don't know any merits that would say this child is a flight risk, and what would the reason be that she would be denied bail.
Now, talk to me about the process that would then need to follow here as far as the court process itself is concerned, because you have an incident that I suppose happened and the evidence we have is on video. How are the investigators going to be collecting this evidence, and how is this evidence going to be presented now, also with the body having been buried?
Okay, so the evidence that is on video, you would think that this young lady would simply just admit to what she did and basically just throw herself before the court and say, I did indeed do this, and what is the court, what is the court's wishes in terms of what happens to me. So that then is the critical element, because if she makes an admission or a confession to what she did, the court can then move to the sanction element of it. So in other words, what does the sentence look like? Now, the big thing with the juvenile justice system is that it is meant to primarily be restorative in nature. So we first meant to restore that child to themselves, because behavior like this means that there's something really, really wrong in terms of this child's life and development. And then you want to attempt to restore them to the world in which they live, and particularly their community. My concern obviously would be that there would be a level at which the community would not want to accept her back, but we have to recognize that that community who raised her. So the court process, in my opinion, would be that, I don't know how she's going to deny what she did, but if they link it to the death of the girl, so in other words, if they create a connection between the assault and that assault causally resulted in the death, I'm not sure what they're going to charge her with. And what they charge her with will largely determine, based on the schedule of the crime or the severity, where she goes in terms of the sentence.
Yeah. How do we handle mercy within the legal justice system in a case, for example, of this nature?
So, I'm trying to be very balanced in what I'm saying about this particular case, because, everybody should be outraged by what was done to the young lady who decided that the world was too dark a place for her to live in and was easier to not be in that world and took her life. At the same time, when I look at that, the other young lady who meted out such incredible violence on a peer, I'm wondering where she got that behavior from, because that didn't arrive at birth or in a vacuum. And then the other concern, obviously, is the fact that she was actually egged on by a crowd and recorded as if this was some kind of movie. So it's it's the perfect storm. And I think what these cases do is they cast a mirror on us as society, and they say to us, listen, these children's behavior simply reflect the world in which they are growing up, and we cannot abdicate that responsibility, which is why our first port of call is a restorative approach. But unfortunately, when one child is deceased, you cannot restore that child because the child is deceased. So it's almost a wisdom of Solomon kind of decision to make around, do we make an example of this child, or do we use this child as an example of what we as adults are teaching children in terms of how we behave towards each other?
I don't know how much experience we have in our legal system with cases of this matter, and I don't know how much you've been exposed to yourself, Luke, but can we expect mercy from the courts on this particular?
Look, your biggest consideration is what is going to happen in terms of what they charge the child with. So is it assault, common assault, GBH, attempted murder, at a stretch, culpable homicide, etc. Because the mercy and what is available to us is dependent on the schedule. So, for example, the crimes of Schedule 1 and 2, you would be able to be diverted, in other words, into a program for young offenders. A Schedule 3, you can actually be imprisoned. And we have got young people of 14, 15, 16 serving 35-year sentences in the one prison that I work in.
Yeah. Right, look, I appreciate your time, and thank you very much for bringing that clarity for us. Women and Men Against Child Abuse Advocacy Manager there, Luke Lamdrecht.